Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 7th November 2020. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. And after looking at the important articles that we are going to discuss today, let us look at the important takeaways from this discussion. Now, first is the impact of election of Joe Biden on India-US relations, and that has been discussed in the article that is there on page number 6. Second is what continuity can be expected from the previous regime if Joe Biden is elected as the next president of United States of America. Further, what are the areas of friction that are likely to arise if a Democratic president is elected? And finally, how the new president is going to work on its global image that has been tarnished during the Trump regime. Then there is another article which is related to the GST imposition on mobility aids. So we will discuss that in detail, and in that we will look at the arguments in favor and against such imposition of GST on the mobility aids that are designed for differently abled sections of the society. Then in the next article, we will look at what is meant by food fortification and what is the importance of micronutrients. And in the last article, we will look at the important criteria that has been used by the 15th Finance Commission. So let us start the discussion with the first article now. Now this article on page number 6 is related to the implications of the election of a new president in the United States of America on India's foreign policy. And as you might all be knowing that Joe Biden is inching towards victory in the United States of America, the main attention in India is on the question as to what kind of foreign policy changes he will bring to India and the US relations. And in this regard, let us try and understand what has been the approach of Joe Biden as the Vice President of America under the Obama administration and how his approach was similar to the Donald Trump's approach. After that, let us look at what are the key issues that exist between India and US and how is Joe Biden likely to handle these. So let us look at these important points from the General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic International Relations. Now in the DNS of 2nd November 2020, we have looked at how the India-US relations have evolved during the Obama administration and how they have evolved during the Trump administration. And there have been favorable foreign policy decisions by the Trump administration towards India. And some of these include the CAATSA waiver that was provided to India on India's oil purchases from Iran and also regarding the development of Chabahar port. Also, India and China have been collaborating on the Indo-Pacific region, and in this regard, the United States of America and India have also been collaborating in the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue as well as Malabar Naval Exercise. Further, regarding Pakistan, the Donald Trump administration had announced that it will be stopping the aid that was provided by the US to the Pakistan. And also, the US has supported the grey listing of Pakistan by the Financial Action Task Force and has also been designating various militants that operate in Pakistan under the UN Security Council resolutions. So these are some of the favorable decisions that were taken by the Trump administration and have nurtured and developed the India-US relations. So for more details, you can always go through the DNS of 2nd November 2020 to understand these aspects and how the India-US relations have evolved from the Obama administration till the Trump administration. Now, as we all know that Joe Biden is likely to be elected as the next president of United States of America. In this regard, the author analyzes the similarity between the Joe Biden's approach and the Trump's approach in the international foreign policy sphere. And highlighting the similarity between Joe Biden's and the Trump's approach, the author has highlighted the issue of Afghanistan. And in this, Joe Biden, who was the vice president under the Obama administration, had advised upon withdrawal of troops from the Afghanistan. And further, he had advised a 5-point agenda known as Counter-Terrorism Plus. Now, what were the key points of this Counter-Terrorism Plus 5-point agenda? So its first focus in the Afghanistan was a full focus on Al-Qaeda. Further, this plan provided that the United States of America exit from other counter-insurgency missions that were operating in the Middle Eastern region. Also, he advised that the United States of America should not focus on the national building theme in the Afghanistan. And also there should be reduction in the US bases in the Afghanistan just to 2 or 3. And finally, he proposed that the US should be fighting with Taliban with a view to bring them to the table for reconciliation. Now, these recommendations were not accepted by the Obama administration. However, Trump had picked up some of the recommendations that were provided by Joe Biden to the Obama administration, and they were visible in the large scale pullout of the US troops from Afghanistan. Also, there has been limited presence at the bases and its missions in Afghanistan. Also, the US has started a reconciliation process with the Taliban, which was visible in the Afghan peace deal that is presently going on between the US and the Taliban. So, the counterterrorism plus agenda of the Joe Biden that was advised to the Obama administration, and also some of the decisions that have been taken by the Trump administration regarding Afghanistan, show a certain kind of similarity. And according to the author, this shows that in the international sphere, there will not be much difference in the approach that has been adopted by Donald Trump administration and that is likely to be adopted by the Mr. Biden administration if he is elected as the President of United States of America. Further, India can see continuity in the approach of United States of America towards India in the foreign policy sphere. And in this regard, we all know that the Donald Trump administration has been focusing on the Indo-Pacific region by aligning with India in the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and various other initiatives in order to counter the rise of China. And accordingly, the author says that the Indo Pacific focus, which has been embraced by the Trump administration, was actually started under the Obama administration in the 2015 when the administration focused on the Asia Pacific region. Further, the author is hopeful that Mr. Biden will build on the military foundational agreements with India and strengthen military cooperation and push the sale of military hardware to India. Now, we note that India and US have signed all the four important military foundational agreements which are required by the strategic partners of the USA. And these include the COMCASA and the recently signed BECA, which was signed at the 2+2 dialogue. However, regarding economy, the author is not very hopeful and it is likely that there will be no major changes on the economic front. However, the new administration can restore the generalized system of preference status for Indian exporters, which was revoked by the Trump administration. And another area of concern between the India and US relations is the visa issue to the Indians in the USA. And in this, the author says that the Joe Biden has already assured Indians on the visa issue in the various election speeches. So, regarding the economic front, no major changes are expected in the initial years. However, there can be decisions to restore the GSP status for Indian exporters and also the resolution of visa issue between India and the US. However, besides being hopeful on the India US relations in the international sphere, there are certain issues that are likely to bring friction between India and US if Joe Biden is elected as the President of the United States of America. And in this, the author highlights that the Democratic Party has been vocal against some of the issues on which Trump administration had initially maintained silence. And some of these include the revocation of Article 370 in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, also the Citizenship Amendment Act and NRC, and communal and caste-based violence in India. Also, the new administration under Joe Biden is likely to question India's actions on the non governmental organizations and also issues related to media freedoms in India. So, these are some of the issues that are likely to bring friction in the India US elections if Joe Biden is finally elected as the President of the United States of America. Now, besides India US relations, there are some of the areas that need to be watched if Joe Biden is elected as the president. And in this, there are certain challenges that are currently being faced by the United States of America under the Donald Trump administration. And in this regard, we note that the United States of America's image as a superpower has received a setback under the Donald Trump administration. And this has been on the account of withdrawal of the US from some of the important international treaties and institutions. So, in this regard, the major challenges that need to be addressed by the new president will include reversing the downward spiral of America, also repairing relations with many countries, and especially the transatlantic region countries. Now, transatlantic countries are the countries that are located on the both sides of Atlantic Oceans. And important transatlantic countries from the US point of view are UK, France, Germany, etc., who are the part of Europe. Also, the major challenge that will be faced by the new president is restoring America's leadership in the UN bodies. And in the last 4 years, we note that the Donald Trump had walked out of at least a dozen multilateral bodies, or had threatened to walk out of such multilateral bodies. And some of the multilateral bodies from which the Trump administration had walked out include the World Health Organization, UNESCO, Human Rights Council, and also the withdrawal of America from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was related to the Iran nuclear deal. And one of the biggest platforms from which the America had moved out was the Paris Climate Accord. Also, the challenge in front of Joe Biden will be to restore the transatlantic and the trans Pacific alliances, and these will include the revival of NATO relationships and the Trans Pacific Partnership, which is related to the economic collaboration between countries on the either side of Pacific Ocean. So, in this, we have seen some of the areas where India is likely to see a continuity from the United States of America with regards to its foreign relations. However, there are certain areas that are likely to bring up friction, and besides that, there are some areas on which the new president will have to work in order to restore the US's image of a superpower. And this aspect of the setback to the status of United States of America as a superpower in the geopolitics was discussed in detail in the Daily News Simplified of 30th October 2020. So you can go through this DNS video as well to understand the different aspects regarding the status of US as a superpower, and also you can go through the DNS of 4th November 2020 in order to understand how the India US relations have evolved from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. And in this DNS, we have already discussed the issues that are likely to be faced by the new president of United States of America if Joe Biden is elected as the president of USA. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 6 is related to the imposition of GST on the mobility aids which are used by the differently abled sections of the society. And some of the mobility aids include the wheelchairs, the tricycles, the braille paper, or the braille watches that are used by differently abled sections of the society. So, in this regard, presently the GST Council imposes a GST rate of 5% on these mobility aids. And the imposition of GST on these essential items has led to increase in their prices. And due to such increase in prices of the mobility aids because of imposition of GST, these items have now become unaffordable for poor sections among the differently abled people. And in this regard, recently a public interest litigation was filed before the Supreme Court on the constitutional validity of the imposition of GST on these mobility aids. Now, the petitioner under this PIL had argued that imposition of GST on these items was discriminatory and violates the fundamental rights of the differently abled people to right to life under Article 21. And accordingly, the Supreme Court had ruled that the decision of imposing tax and determining its tax rate is the prerogative of the executive, and the judiciary cannot ordinarily interfere in such matters, and accordingly, it asked the petitioners to file his grievance before the GST Council. So, in this regard, the author highlights the government's arguments for imposition of GST on the mobility aids, and after that, he provides counter arguments with regards to imposition of GST on the mobility aids for differently abled people. So, let us look at this issue of imposition of GST on the mobility aids for differently abled people. And these can be important for us from General Studies Paper 2 point of view under the topic social issues. So, firstly, what has been the government's argument for the imposition of GST on the mobility aids? Now, the government believes that imposition of GST on the mobility aids is a win-win situation for the domestic manufacturers and the differently abled people. And why is it so? So, it is so because the GST provides for input tax credit mechanism, and it enables the domestic manufacturers to claim input tax credit on the payment of taxes on various input items that are used for manufacturing such mobility aids. So the domestic manufacturers can claim input tax credit on the taxes that they have paid on various inputs that are used in the manufacturing of mobility aids for differently abled people. So such kind of input tax credit incentivizes these manufacturers to undertake higher production, leading to decrease in the prices of mobility aids, and ultimately it will also benefit the differently abled people. So the government's logic of imposition of GST is that by imposition of GST, the manufacturers will be able to claim input tax credit on the inputs that are used in the manufacturing of mobility aids. Now, as the manufacturers will be able to claim input tax credit, it will incentivize them to undertake higher production of such products. And if higher production takes place, it will ultimately lead to decrease in the prices of these mobility aids, and accordingly, it will also benefit the different sections under the differently abled people. Also, the government has highlighted that if GST exemption is provided on the mobility aids, the implications will be adverse for both the domestic manufacturers as well as the differently abled people. So, if the mobility aids are exempted from the GST tax system, the domestic manufacturers would not be able to claim input tax credit on the payment of taxes on various inputs that are used in the manufacturing of such products, and this will disincentivize these domestic manufacturers. And accordingly, an exemption of GST on such mobility aids would make them unavailable as well as unaffordable for the differently abled people. So clearly, the government's argument is that the imposition of GST on the mobility aids is a win win situation for both the domestic manufacturers as well as the differently abled people. And that is because it incentivizes the domestic manufacturers for improving and increasing the production of such mobility aids. And at the same time, if the production increases, it will ultimately lead to decrease in their prices and it will make them affordable for the differently abled sections. However, there have been counter arguments on the government's position of imposition of GST on the mobility aids. So let us look at these counter arguments that have been highlighted in this article. So in this regard, it has been highlighted that the government's argument regarding the imposition of GST on the mobility aids is a flawed one. And that is because the government already provides various exemptions on different products under the GST regime. And in this regard, it is said that the GST Council has fixed 0% GST on number of goods which are essential to the human beings. And such products include the unbranded agricultural items like the cereal grains, fish, fresh milk, natural honey, etc. And accordingly, the mobility aids can be considered as essential for the differently abled people in a similar manner as cereal grains or fish, fresh milk, etc. are considered as essential to the human needs. And accordingly, such mobility aids, which can be considered as essential for the differently abled people, can also and should be exempted from the GST regime. So this is the counter argument on the imposition of GST on the mobility aids. That is, it can be considered as an essential product for the differently abled people and hence they should be provided with exemption under the GST regime. Further, it has been argued that bringing the mobility aids under the GST regime is not the only way to provide or incentivize the domestic manufacturers. And as such, there is availability of alternatives to incentivize the domestic manufacturers of such mobility aids. So in this regard, the author says that the government has other options available to incentivize the domestic manufacturing of mobility aids without affecting the interests of the differently abled people. So one of the ways in which the government can do so is by providing or exempting the manufacturers from payment of taxes on the inputs that are used in the manufacturing of such products. So it can directly provide the exemptions on the payment of taxes on such inputs in the manufacturing process of the mobility aid items. And it is not necessary to bring the mobility aid items in the GST regime to incentivize the domestic manufacturing. So these are some of the arguments and the counter arguments regarding the imposition of GST on the mobility aids items which are used by the differently abled people. So in conclusion, the author says that considering the importance of mobility aid items, the GST Council should realize and learn from countries such as Canada and Australia and grant an exemption to the mobility aid items from the GST. And he further argues that the purpose of taxation is not to generate revenue but is to ensure the welfare of all the sections of the society, and as such, the mobility aid items which are essential for the differently abled people should be exempted from the GST regime and which will be a gesture for ensuring welfare of this section of the society. So these are few important points regarding this social issue, and with this let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 10 highlights the recent initiative of the Government of India in order to curb the issue of anemia in India. And in this, the Government of India has announced that it will expand the supply of fortified rice with iron, vitamin B12, and folic acid. And this will be done on a pilot basis from 15 districts to 15 states, and all these efforts are aimed at curbing anemia. So, this relates to the importance of micronutrients and also malnutrition in India. So, in this regard, let us understand what is meant by food fortification and how are iron, vitamin B, and folic acid important micronutrients for human body. After that, let us look at what are the issues in the announcement that has been done by the government of India. Now, the naturally growing food articles sometimes do not have essential micronutrients, and accordingly, food fortification is a process which enriches the micronutrients in such food articles. So, the food fortification or the enrichment is the process of adding these important micronutrients to the food articles that are naturally grown. Now, what are these essential micronutrients and why are they required in India? Now, the deficiency of these important micronutrients like the iron, vitamin B, and folic acid leads to anemia in people. And anemia is a condition in which the blood doesn't have enough healthy red blood cells. And this leads to reduced oxygen flow to the body's organs. So, this is one of the diseases which is caused by the deficiency of iron. And according to National Family Health Survey, as many as 58.5% of the children between the ages of 6 months to 59 months suffer from anemia. And about 53.1% women between the age group of 15 to 49 are anemic in India. So, this data provided by the National Family Health Survey highlights the gravity of the problem of anemia in the children and the women in India. So, in order to check the anemia in the children and the women in India, iron supplements can be used for iron deficiency, vitamin supplements may be used for low vitamin levels. Now, there is no direct treatment that is available for the anemia, and as such, its treatments depends upon the underlying cause or treating the underlying cause, and that is the deficiency of these important micronutrients. And the vitamin B supplements can be used for low levels of vitamins. So, as we note that iron is one of the important micronutrients for solving the issue of anemia, and accordingly, the government has started this program of fortifying rice with the iron as well as vitamin B and folic acid. Now, folic acid is a type of vitamin B that helps our body in producing and maintaining new cells, and it also helps in preventing changes to the DNA that may ultimately lead to cancer. So, we see that these micronutrients are of immense importance for healthy human beings. And given the high rate of anemia in the children and the women in India, the fortification or providing these necessary micronutrient supplements become very important. So accordingly, this government of India is a welcome step. However, let us look at some of the issues that will be there in implementing such kind of measures by the government of India by the procedure of food fortification or enrichment. Now, it has been argued that fortification of staple varieties of cereals may hurt the local economies. Now, why is it likely to hurt the local economies? So, in order to implement this government order, the government schools, the Anganwadi centers, and the mill owners and the snack manufacturers will have to be brought on board. And as such, the local manufacturers will not be benefiting much from this. Further, the efficacy of the fortification process in solving the issue of micronutrient deficiency has been called in question. And according to the trials that have been done in controlled setting, by providing 100% recommended dietary allowance of iron through the tablets has shown the results within 10 months. So it is recommended that by providing iron tablets directly, you can solve the issue of anemia or iron deficiency within a period of 10 months, which is a very short period of time. However, if the iron is supplied through the way of fortified rice, a minimum of 24 months of constant exposure is needed before any kind of impact is seen by such kind of intervention. So, some of the experts have argued that providing iron tablets is better as compared to the efficacy of fortified rice in improving the iron deficiency. Further, as we all know that to implement the distribution of fortified rice at the government schools and Anganwadi centers, millers as well as snack manufacturers will have to be brought on board. And in this regard, these food manufacturers will have to use the extrusion machines to make the fortified rice kernels enriched with iron and other nutrients. However, the challenge that is likely to be faced is that as many as 28,000 rice millers will have to be brought on board in order to fortify the rice or other products. And these millers will now have to install the blending machines which can mix the fortified kernels into normal rice. So the first challenge is to bring the rice millers on board for the fortification of rice. And second challenge is that these millers will now have to install the blending machines for the fortification of rice. So these are few challenges. However, there are others who have warned of adverse consequences of the corporatization of the food system. And that is because it will provide or push the food manufacturing sector into the corporate hands. And as the corporates are run on the market principles and they rely mainly on the profits, they are likely to adversely impact the welfare agenda of the government and the poor section of the society adversely. So few points in this article are important from the preliminary examination point of view and they relate to the iron, vitamin B and folic acid. However, some of the points are important in the mains examination which can be used in writing answers in the malnutrition section in the general studies paper 2. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 1 is related to the warning that has been provided by the Finance Commission on rising GST dues for the states. So, in this discussion, let us look at the criteria that has been adopted by the 15th Finance Commission and let us compare that with the 14th Finance Commission. And that can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view under the topic economic development. And if you look at this question, it was asked in the year 2015 and it was directly related to the 14th Finance Commission's recommendation. So such kind of questions can be asked in the preliminary examination related to the recommendations of the Finance Commission. Now this question read, with reference to the 14th Finance Commission, which of the following statements is or are correct? First is that it has increased the share of states in the central divisible pool from 32% to 42%, and second was that it has made recommendations concerning sector specific grants. So in this regard, the first statement that was given here was an important landmark in the divisible pool of taxes. And that was because the Finance Commission had increased the share of states from 32% to 42%. However, the second statement that was given here was incorrect, and as such, the correct answer that came out was A1 only. So in this regard, let us look at the key highlights of the 15th Finance Commission and the criteria that it has adopted, and let us compare that with the criteria adopted by the 14th Finance Commission. Now, important aspects of the recommendations that have been provided by the 15th Finance Commission have been discussed in detail in the prelims compass of economy. So the 15th Finance Commission was headed by Mr. N.K. Singh. And unique thing about this year's Finance Commission is that usually the Finance Commission recommendations are valid for a period of 5 years. However, the 15th Finance Commission's recommendations would be valid for a period of 6 years. And what are the important recommendations of the 15th Finance Commissions? The first is related to the vertical devolution of taxes. And in this, the share of the states in the center's taxes is recommended to be decreased from 42% during the period 2015 to 20 to 41% during the period 2020 to 21. And this 1% has been reduced from the divisible pool of taxes to provide for the newly formed union territories of Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, the resources from the central government. So accordingly, this becomes an important fact that the share of the states in the center's taxes is decreased from 42% to 41%. And we have seen that such kind of statements can be asked in the preliminary examination as was done in the prelims of 2015 in the question that we have discussed. Now, besides providing the criteria for the divisible pool of taxes or the devolution of taxes between the central government and the state governments as a whole, the Finance Commission also provides a criteria for horizontal distribution of taxes amongst the states. So, in this regard, the 14th Finance Commission had used the following criteria. So, let us compare them with the criteria that has been adopted by the 15th Finance Commission, and the details of these have been discussed in the prelims compass. Now, first is the income distance criteria. And 14th Finance Commission had provided 50% weightage to this criteria, while the 15th Finance Commission provides 45% of weightage to this criteria. Second is the population based on the 1971 census, and the 14th Finance Commission had provided 17.5% weightage to this aspect. However, the 15th Finance Commission has not considered the population based on this census, and it has based its recommendations on the census of 2011. And it has provided 15% weightage to the 2011 census based population. However, the 14th Finance Commission had used 10% for the population that was provided by the 2011 census. Further, another important criteria that is being used by the 15th Finance Commission is the demographic performance. and this aspect has been provided a weightage of 12.5%, and it was not considered in 14th Finance Commission. Now, why has this criteria been adopted? Now, when the 15th Finance Commission was formulated, and it highlighted that it will be adopting the population based on the 2011 census for the horizontal distribution of taxes, the southern states had raised concern. And that is because the southern states have relatively less population as compared to the population in the northern states. And accordingly, they would have been disincentivized for their improvement in demographic performance or stabilization in the population growth. And accordingly, for incentivizing the southern states for their demographic performance, 12.5% weightage has been provided by the 15th Finance Commission. Further, the 14th Finance Commission used the criteria of forest cover and had provided it the weightage of 7.5%. However, this has not been considered by the 15th Finance Commission. But it has used the criteria of forest and ecology, which was not considered by 14th Finance Commission, and it has provided 10% weightage to this particular aspect. Now, this forest and ecology focuses on the improvement in the dense forests and not just the improvement in the forest cover. So this aims at incentivizing those states which have focused on better conservation of their forest resources. Also, area has been provided a similar weightage to that which was used in the 14th Finance Commission, and it stands at 15%. However, the tax effort which was not considered in the 14th Finance Commission has been considered by the 15th Finance Commission, and it has been provided 2.5% weightage. So by comparing 15th and the 14th Finance Commission, you note that population based on 1971 has not been considered in 15th Finance Commission. Again, the 15th Finance Commission provides importance to the demographic performance by the states. Also, the 15th Finance Commission focuses on the efforts that have been made by the states in order to conserve the dense forests and not just increasing the forest cover. And besides that, it has used the criteria of tax effort that has been done by the state governments, and it has been provided 2.5% weightage. So these are few important highlights from the preliminary examination point of view. For more details, the final report or the recommendations of the 15th Finance Commission will be discussed in near future. Now, the final recommendations of the 15th Finance Commission are still awaited. So let us wait for them, and they will be discussed in detail in the coming DNS videos. So let's conclude this discussion with the question for the day.